All right, let's step into a bit of a shadow history. We're going to explore one of the most unsettling what-if scenarios you can possibly imagine.
I know, it sounds like something out of a sci-fi novel, right? But when you really stop and think it through, you start to see just how much of our world, the world we live in today, hinged on the outcome of this one single conflict. So, yeah, let's dive in.
Okay, so before we can even begin to imagine this alternate reality, we have to ground ourselves in the real one. We need to look at that one pivotal moment in our history that really set the stage for everything that came after.
And you really have to remember the sheer scale of this thing. I mean, this wasn't just some regional squabble. It was a full-on global cataclysm. It pulled in nations from literally every continent and completely reshaped what modern warfare even meant. The stakes? They were absolutely astronomical.
At its core, this was the ultimate clash of ideas. On one side, you had the Allied powers, right? A pretty diverse coalition of nations, all fighting for concepts like freedom and democracy. And then, on the other side, you had Nazi Germany, a regime built from the ground up on an ideology of total control and, frankly, brutal discrimination.
Okay, so hold that reality in your mind for a second. And now, just flip it. Everything you learned in history class, all the documentaries you've ever watched, just for a moment, erase the ending. Now imagine that instead of defeat, there was a victory for the Third Reich.
So what happens next? What happens the day after that victory? Well, the consequences would start rolling out immediately, beginning with the very maps we use to make sense of our world.
And the scale of what they had planned, it's just staggering. We're not talking about a few minor border changes here and there. No, this was a complete top-to-bottom restructuring of Europe politically and geographically. Entire nations, with centuries of their own history, would have just been wiped off the map, either swallowed up by the Reich or turned into puppet states.
And it changed that huge in Europe. Well, that would send shockwaves across the entire globe. It's like the whole political center of gravity for the world would just shift, moving away from the powers we know and recentering itself on this new, absolutely dominant European empire.
Just really think about that for a second. The entire 20th century as we know it, the one people often call the American century, it just might not have happened. The U.S. could have ended up as a much more isolated nation, staring across the Atlantic at a single, massive, and hostile empire. So, okay, that's the big picture, the grand scale of geopolitics. But what about day-to-day life? Let's bring this down to a more personal level. What would it actually feel like to be an ordinary person living in this remade world?
Okay, let's talk about some of the basic rights we probably don't even think about twice, like the ability to speak your mind, to criticize the people in charge, to just debate ideas openly. In this world, what would that look like? Limited?
Yeah, that's putting it very mildly. Any kind of dissent, even just a careless word spoken to a friend, could be seen as a threat to the state. Imagine every single conversation you have being potentially policed. Suddenly, free thought itself becomes a dangerous act.
And what about expression? Art, music, books, all the culture that helps define who we are?
Well, there'd be almost none. Culture would just become another tool for the state. Art would basically just be propaganda. Anything that didn't fit the regime's narrow ideology, all that so-called degenerate art, it would all be suppressed or even just flat out destroyed.
So what you end up with is a society built on total, absolute control. I mean, just picture it. A world with constant surveillance, where you can't even be sure if your neighbors are informants. A world where diversity isn't celebrated. It's seen as a weakness that needs to be stamped out. And your ability to travel, to learn from other cultures, that would be incredibly restricted.
And this level of control would even bleed into technology and science. I mean, sure, some military tech might advance pretty quickly, but overall, scientific curiosity would be completely shackled by ideology. Any research that dared to challenge party doctrine, forbidden.
And when you zoom out, this is what was really at stake. The very foundations of our modern interconnected world. Things like the internet, which only works because of open exchange. Globalization, which is built on free trade. International cooperation, all of it. It might have looked completely different, or more likely, it might not exist at all in a world defined by walls and suspicion.
Okay, so after walking through that pretty dark alternate timeline, it's time to pull back. It's time to come back to reality. Because really, understanding what could have been
is maybe the best way to truly appreciate what is, and to see why history matters so much. Because for all of the terrifying possibilities we just walked through, well, the good news is, none of it actually happened.
That's the simple, powerful, historical fact. Nazi Germany was defeated. Through incredible, almost unbelievable sacrifice and a global coalition, the Allied powers won. The regime fell.
And that victory, it wasn't just the end of a war. It was really the beginning of our modern world. The rights we have, the freedoms we enjoy, the global cooperation we sometimes take for granted, even the tech you're using to listen to this right now, all of it grew out of that one single outcome.
You know, there's a great line that says, "The world we know today is the result of those moments." And it's so true. Our world didn't just happen by accident. It is the direct result of those pivotal moments. A legacy of the path that was chosen and the future that was so hard fought for.
So, we'll leave you with this final thought. Just look around you today. Think about the news you're free to read, the places you can travel to, the very thoughts you're allowed to have and to share. And ask yourself, how much of your world is built on the foundation of that one, single, incredibly hard-won victory?